how our customers are utilizing Azure Security Center to improve their security posture and Azure Defender to protect their workloads in the cloud. In this episode, I'm going to talk with a cybersecurity analyst from Microsoft, and he is going to share his experience working with customers that are utilizing those platforms. Stay there, we'll be right back. Welcome everyone to Azure Security Center in the Field, episode 31. We are going to do something extremely different today because most of the time we have engineering talking about features, capabilities. Today, this episode is dedicated to notes from the field. We have here a cybersecurity consultant from Microsoft, Tom Quinn. Thank you, Tom, for being here.
Absolutely.
And we are going to talk about his experience working with Azure Security Center and Azure Defender, some very interesting use case scenarios. So before we start, Tom, give us an overview about what you do for Microsoft, your role.
Yeah, perfect. So I've been with Microsoft for actually coming up on 13 years, and about 8/9 of those years focusing on Azure, and the majority of that time just focusing on Azure security. A lot for the companies that are looking at adopting Azure, starting to use Azure.
Nice. And I'm assuming that before COVID, you were traveling a lot to visit customers, and now it's more virtual, right?
Yeah, I'm not too upset about that. But absolutely. I normally speak with maybe, say, 300 customers a year.
Wow, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of experience, folks. So I'm very excited about this. So let's start with cloud security posture management, right? We understand that security hygiene is still number one priority across most of the organizations because they deploy new things in Azure. They sometimes don't have the right visibility. Can you give us some examples of how enterprise customers are starting or are on this journey to use Azure Security Center to improve their security posture, how they are utilizing the security score?
Oh, absolutely. And thank heavens we have it. At least customers are very happy about it. A couple different ways. People really start to leverage it and take advantage of it. And a good example would be with a company I was working with. They had fairly, I would say, widespread Azure adoption. This happens all the time. Lines of business will start to pick up Azure and use it. And this happened in the case of this company I'm going to talk about. They had multiple workloads and multiple use cases in production, out in Azure. Mm-hmm. And the security teams, sometimes they're not always brought in, up front. Security teams, governance teams, let alone like compliance teams. In this situation, there were quite a few workloads, production workloads out in Azure. And the security team, the central security team, was like, wow, we need to get a handle on how these systems are secured, if they're secured properly, and have a way to kind of not so much keep watch, not in a bad way, in a big brother way, but more of a, hey, we got to make sure people follow at least some decent best practices, mm-hmm. the core, solid best practices around how they configure these systems. And so when we talk to them about Secure Score and what it does, and being able to, and enable it, you can enable it as part of this Azure Security Center, so they could get that insight over their entire Azure estate for the enterprise, across the enterprise. That was like that was what they needed. Mm-hmm. They needed to be able to see how things were configured if they were misconfigured at a layer on top of all these different workloads, and also they adopted it so they could manage to it.
Right.
Beyond, and that was pretty cool. This is the case, one of the cases I've seen where it was really seized on by a company, and even today, and this has been a couple of years, they managed to it, meaning they'll see what's going on, they'll watch out what's going across their environment. They have many more proactive sort of steps in place to ensure people do follow rules, but you still use it to look at the overall security posture. So it's exactly how Microsoft intended the tool to be used, and they are fully on board, and they even have dashboards of it to report up to management.
Yeah.
It was spot on.
That
And
was actually going to be my question. Is not only the security cloud security team utilized the tool, but also they utilize security score to show upper management how they are progressing their security posture enhancement, right?
in the CISO for the company, once he saw it, he's the one who said, "Yep, we need this to happen." So up down the chain, they were very happy about it. So it's an ongoing dashboard. It gets, I think, reported on. It might even be weekly, and then summarized and reported up monthly to the entire management team. So and this was a big organization. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Again, it's what we wanted customers to do with it, and they've enhanced it too. They've gone beyond just Secure Score, which is still their mainstay. Um,
Now, one
they,
thing that I heard, and you probably heard the same thing, is many times the cloud security team or cloud posture management team, they do not have the level of privilege on the workloads itself to make remediation. So it creates a challenge for them to remediate the security recommendations. They have to work very close to workload owners to remediate. How you see that in the field? How they overcome that challenge?
yeah, and this is always a bit of a organizational challenge to some degree. Who has what privilege to do what? Um, and with a SOC team or the governance team, however the organization structure, maybe the security team or even the cloud security team, um, oftentimes, if there's a recommendation for a control configuration change as reported by Security Center, or maybe one of the other policy initiatives included in Security Center, they may see something that needs to be changed, and it's a security control configuration. Without the context of the workload and how those services are configured, or what's the desired configuration for those services, it usually, what I've found anyway, Yuri, they tend to work and contact that workload owner and make sure that the workload owner or whoever's ultimately responsible for that workload is part of the loop
Yeah.
in terms of taking action. Because sometimes you could take a blind action, but it may not be the response you're looking for. What if it's like a dev test kind of workload and somebody wants to exercise a different configuration, maybe even look at different types of threats with that configuration? So it might be the desired state. So it's something that a lot of customers are still kind of trying to make sure is efficient and have the right process and the right players in place with the right privilege.
Right. There is a lot of process involved. I notice also that companies that are more mature, they have better governance in place, which means that they also use Azure Security Center recommendations to implement guardrails in the beginning of the pipeline to even avoid a bad
Absolutely.
configuration to pass in the first place, right?
Yeah. It's the ones I've seen too, and totally agree, when they have more of a mature governance. And it's kind of thing that always continues to mature, especially when people became more aware as their workload owners, business owners were moving more towards cloud. It's having a pretty, and it can be a pretty simple process where, hey, you look over what security controls should be in place, and often driven by Secure Score or maybe one of the other compliance regimes, as part of the cycle going from the concept, dev, test, QA into prod. So once you're in prod, you really know exactly what's going on. It's at that point you could even essentially lock the system or even have a more of an enforcement type mode around
Right.
policy.
Right.
So it's clean. Yeah, and that's kind of a great state to be in. And I think that's where a lot of people are moving. It takes a while.
Yeah, it's a journey, and as I said, the advantage of having good governance in place is that once you achieve that secure score, you may even provision new things, but you're not going to see a drop, right? Because when you don't have good governance, you remediate and then you provision new stuff that is not secure, you're going to see a drop on your secure score.
Exactly, and it's great because it actually helps illuminate the need for better governance processes.
Yeah.
In general, I've seen customers use that effectively. They're like, man, look at all these things. We should have had a process in place to avoid these things in the first place. And then when they establish it, they maintain, like you were saying, Yuri, they maintain and improve kind of their ultimate security posture and their secure score. They're moving forward.
Yeah.
So it's really useful that way.
Yeah, one thing that we released some time ago is the Secure Score Overtime Workbook, which is a great way for you to see those drops, right? Because I have many scenarios where a customer come to me and say, I was really going good, 80%, and then suddenly I dropped to 60%. How can I track it down, right? So if you are using the workbook, you can go exactly to that point in time and see, for example, which recommendations negatively affect your secure score. So just make sure to, I'm not sure if you have any insights of people using the workbook.
Absolutely. And on the other side too, when a security team, governance team says, "Hey, we need to do this," they can use that as almost evidence to show, "Hey, this is why we allocated a quarter of Mary's time, to work with the cloud security team to focus on governance and improve our processes." So I've seen people use that as saying, "This is how effective and how important this is."
Right.
If that makes sense, Yuri, but definitely looking for drops. Nobody wants to see a drop.
Yeah.
You can point to exactly the time, and like you said, look into what happened, what was deployed, or what was misconfigured.
Now there are a lot of things also. You probably see that a lot is when it comes to improving the secure score. We also inherited in the recommendation things like updates. System updates, vulnerability assessments powered by Qualys or vulnerabilities on the SQL database. And those things usually, they have their own process for patch management, right? And sometimes they still not patching things right away. It takes some time. And that's where you also see a lot of drop. Every month you see a drop because there is a new patch, you don't apply, and you see that drop.
Yeah, is kind of a joke too. So almost every company I've talked to, and when we ask them about, so I'm sure you have a clean, efficient, very effective patch management process and tooling, and the reaction's always the same because nobody does. It's a complex problem. If it was really easy and was everyone patched automatically and updated all the time when patches were released, which is what people are moving towards, and they want to, but sometimes the reality of the situation doesn't let that happen.
Yep.
So it is an area where people see it, and it's in a way it's kind of a nice thing because it'll nudge people towards ultimately the behavior they want, which is to be able to patch as patches are readily available. And we want, as security folks like yourself, myself, that's what we know is the right answer, or we want people to do. Sometimes reality puts a check on that, and it's universal, man. For the companies I've talked to, it's a universal challenge, and that's where secure score. If it happens, when it's going to happen, and it's awesome because you have that exemption capability at a resource level.
Yeah.
To you know what you're doing, and you still can manage effectively to secure score by taking into account your processes and your state.
And you touch on a very important point, which is the exemption, because what happened is a lot of customers, they are overutilizing the exemption feature because they are exempting a lot of things, right? And they keep asking me, why do I have to put an expiration date on exemption? And the answer is pretty simple. You don't want to be blind on that resource, forever. You want to say, I'm going to exempt this resource for the next 2 months, but I'm going to put a task for me to remediate that in the next 2 months, right? So you don't really want to exempt something forever. Of course, there are very, very specific scenarios that you might want to exempt for 1 year. For example, you have a server that runs a legacy application and you know that you're not going to update that server, something like that, right? So, but even that, you should revisit that exemption every 6 months at least.
It's funny, man. I use the same thing kind of. The example I use working with customers around that when they're like, "Oh, I just want to exempt it," and I'm like, "Well, you got to be careful. When you exempt something for a long time." And the example I use is like, it's just like opening up a firewall to get something to work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like I wish there were timers on those types of scenarios too, where you can have something left open. In other words, and that's not bad. That's not a good security practice.
Yeah.
So right there with you.
That's why, for example, when we do just-in-time VM access, we say you're gonna have access for the next 3 hours,
Yeah,
right? And then after
your
that,
time.
yeah,
Same thing. Yep, and absolutely true for exemptions. They're a blessing, but also they should be handled with care.
with
I think
care.
that's you're saying the same thing.
Absolutely, because
I
the worse than not be secure is have the false sensation that you are secure, right?
yeah, just like I'm secure in my attic
Yeah,
office.
that's.
Although I am
By the way,
secure.
that's beautiful. That's probably the best background that ever I've seen on this show. So beautiful.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Now, switching to detection, right? Because when we talk about secure posture, we talk about prevention, detection. So, cloud secure posture management more around prevention. Now, when we go to detection, we are talking more about Azure Defender and threat detection according to the different plans.
Yeah.
Based on your field experience, how you've seen the adoption of Azure Defender, and if there is any particular plan that you see that is really getting traction.
Oh, in a big way. Because I kind of, I sort of grew up with Azure, PaaS services, then IaaS and PaaS, and one of the challenges has always been, hey, here's this new world, new platform. Customers need to know how to watch over what they do out there. Again, not from a control perspective, like you're saying, from a detection perspective. How do I watch over it and see and know when something might be an attack? And starting with servers, for instance, years ago, with Azure Security Center servers and Azure Defender for servers now, their server environment, and where you've got the greatest responsibility, but you also have the greatest latitude to do things on those servers. So having a native tool to the platform that can provide those server level detections and watch over those servers, the behavior on those servers, especially something that's I would say fairly integrated with the platform, being able to take in like Microsoft's threat intelligence feed, have a evolving set of detections kind of out of the box for those systems was kind of a godsend, because there really was kind of challenging otherwise. Especially true for PaaS services.
Mm-hmm.
One of the areas that's usually kind of the lowest hanging fruit for customers around the use of native Azure Defender capabilities is around PaaS services. All PaaS services have, and preaching to the choir, you've written the book on this, Yuri, but this is a conversation I have a lot with customers. Like, well, you can watch over those services from a data plane logging perspective, diagnostic logs, all the reads and writes, all the inputs and outputs going to and from a service. And watch over them from a security perspective,
Mm-hmm.
looking for active threats, active attacks. But it's not easy to do.
Right.
It really isn't. And here, our threat analyst teams have put together these detections for those specific PaaS services and critical PaaS services.
Right.
Things like Azure Key Vault,
Mm-hmm.
You watch over that, keys, secrets, certificates. And so these detections out of the box, it's kind of a no-brainer. In other words,
Yeah, one that for me is a no-brainer is Azure Defender for storage, because
yeah,
storage, how many storage accounts are widely open to the internet? And sometimes they have a reason to be widely open, although we have a recommendation that says, hey, you have a storage account that is open. So from the preventative side, you can remediate that. But there are use case scenarios that you have to leave the storage account open. The problem is that they leave it open, and sometimes they store confidential information in that storage account. And now it's widely open, right? So how do you know if someone is trying to scan that storage account?
it's kind of a no-brainer, isn't it? And I have the same sort of interactions with customers, especially if that, like you said, the storage account's being used by an application. And most, out of anything, Azure storage is used really broadly.
Right.
And of course, all Azure services and applications. For production data, it's kind of an out-of-the-box way to watch over the behavior around that storage account. It's really handy. Just turn it on, and it'll perform those types of analytics
And
for
the
you.
other one that I think is getting a lot of traction, I'm not sure if you have experience with that with your customers, is Azure Defender for Kubernetes, because Kubernetes is a whole new, a matrix of security and threat landscape, if you think about it. So a lot of customers, they are not really well trained in regarding to security in Kubernetes. So Azure Defender for Kubernetes brings that threat intelligence for them.
It's another No, spot on. I was just talking about this with a customer 2 days ago for the same reasons. Yeah, Kubernetes in general, I mean, it's becoming more and more gelled, I guess, across the board. But the securing and monitoring from a security perspective of Kubernetes across the different planes, both for the registries and image registries, the actual behavior and runtime behavior across the cubes, across the controller nodes, is something that's it's kind of new for a lot of folks. Right. Having something kind of out of the box that answers those questions, it's an easy button. I mean, it's really low hanging fruit. So yeah, that's the other one. And you brought that up. I should have mentioned that before. I was again just working with a customer 2 days ago on this.
And I'm gonna just highlight one more because this one is I'm very passionate about, which is the Azure Defender for Resource Manager, which is new. We released some a couple of months ago, but it's so powerful because it looked at malicious activities across the Azure Resource Manager layer, and there are so many things that can be done on that layer. If you really don't have threat detection on that layer, you really don't know what's going on.
And I couldn't agree with that more too, and that's getting a lot of interest because of what you said. We always emphasize, and I talked with actually almost every major enterprise customer about this, that management plane action. Azure is a software-defined environment by default. It's all recorded. All the CRUD activity is recorded as part of your Azure activity log.
Right.
And before we had this capability, I always said, hey, you should get that activity log and use a SIM tool like Sentinel or other SIM tools, and really watch over it to ensure that something. Only the thing you want to have happen.
Right.
Something not happen. And now there's a tool that can do that for you, so you don't have to do all that stuff yourself. I mean, it's awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. It is awesome.
I'm excited about it too. In other words,
yeah. Ton, I mean, we could go hours and hours talking here about, based on the vast experience that you have working in the field with customers. But that was a great chat. I'm just going to ask you for one final consideration. If you have anything to share, any best practice, any top of your mind that you want to share with the audience.
I really think for the audience, especially around Azure Security Center and Azure Defenders, given what they do, as in particular around security posture management, it's kind of, I hate to say, no-brainer. They are absolutely worth exploring, at least trying. These are services. It's not something you have to license forever. It's really powerful because you can try and explore and understand its value, and we document its value, but you can actually try them. And if it doesn't work for you too, it's something you can actually, hey, it doesn't work for me, or maybe I have a compensating monitoring system in place. That's one thing I want to bring up and emphasize.
Great advice, and I will just emphasize that the cloud security posture management capabilities are free in Azure Security Center. So why not? Why not?
Why not? I say the same thing. It's like a third pair of eyes you don't have to pay for.
Yeah.
Why not just do it?
Right. Excellent. Totally excellent. Thank you very much, Tom, for your time. I appreciate it.
Totally, Yuri. Thanks for the time.
All right, everyone. That's a wrap for episode 31. Make sure to subscribe to Microsoft Security Channel, aka .ms ASC in the field. See you again next time.